Welcome into the Week 8 Roundup edition of Inside the Huddle here on High School Cube News. Brian Chimino with Mike Clark of the Sun-Times, Beth Long of FoxSports, and Scout.com. Lincoln Way East up to number 7 in the Super 25 after a 23-9 win over Bolingbrook. Liam Morrissey doing his thing again, 173 yards in the game, goes over 1,000 for the season.
One of the things that Lincoln Way East talked about all summer long and then coming into the season was about how unhappy they were about losing 2 conference games last year to Homewood Flossmoor and to Bolingbrook. That didn't happen this year. They beat both of those teams. They got a game against Joliet Central, which is winless this year, so they should wrap up the undisputed conference title this week. But I mean, you know, Lincoln Way East just keeps rolling along. Liam Morrissey is one of the breakout players of the year. I mean, I don't know how many people heard of him coming into the season, but he got a chance to play a little bit more when one of their other running backs got hurt, and now he's probably going to be getting a chance to play on Saturdays.
It's interesting. That was the game that I saw on Friday night, and I spoke with Morrissey after the game, and he said he's not getting any interest yet, but he's very interested in playing college football. Like Mike said, I do expect that to change. There were several college coaches on the sidelines, a coach from Illinois watching him play, and it's just a matter of time before his film and word gets out about him before he starts getting interest. It would be very surprising if by the end of the season he's not got some schools on him.
Looking at the big games last week in the Catholic League Blue, Loyola made a change at quarterback, going with Aiden Walsh, the third stringer, but it didn't matter because it was the Ramblers' defense that shined. 38-14 over St. Rita. 7 takeaways, accounting up to 21 points.
Loyola's defense is there. Mark Dowdle, one of their DBs, a few weeks ago, he shut down Miles Boykin, which we didn't think was possible. This week he did a great job on Brandon Gaston. Gaston did break 1 long play for a touchdown, but Dowdle had 3 takeaways, 2 picks, and a fumble recovery. And the flip side of that is, as you said, you know, Loyola had their first 2 quarterbacks out with injuries. One of them, DJ Melsheimer, was out with a concussion, and Emmett Clifford, who had been the number 2, was out with a collarbone injury. But you know, Loyola just figures out a way to get it done on offense, which has kind of been their MO. And they kind of pulled away in the 4th quarter in this game. This game actually was a lot closer than the score looked. It was 17-14 going into the 4th quarter, and Loyola pulled away.
And how about the shootout between Providence and Brother Rice? 45-42 your final. Both quarterbacks, Hunniford and Alarcon, putting up big numbers.
These were video game type numbers, obviously. Hunniford had over 350 yards, I believe. Alarcon was over 400 yards. And the interesting thing about where the touchdowns went for Providence is I think they went to 4 or 5 different receivers. So again, Hunniford just making great decisions out there. We've said all year that he's a Player of the Year candidate, and I think one of the things we're seeing is that, you know, he doesn't have to go to Boykin. I mean, and that's one of the things that you know, we wondered about. You know, is it just going to be, you know, if they shut down Miles, are they going to be able to go anywhere else? And that hasn't been the case at all. So I mean, Hunniford is just having a ridiculous season.
Absolutely. And interesting day at Providence. Miles Boykin presented his jersey for the Semper Fidelis All-American game around 3 o'clock, and then they went to Mass and then played the game, and so everybody was really pepped up. It was in the middle of a pep rally. Ricky Smalling of Brother Rice caught 3 touchdowns, and he doesn't have any offers yet. He's only a sophomore, but he is the player that to me reminds me the most of Laquan Treadwell, who's now having a fantastic year at Ole Miss from Crete Mooney. He's got the long arms, long stride. He adds a couple more inches of height when he's only a sophomore. It's very likely he will. He could be that next big national kid that we see coming out of the Chicago area, in my opinion.
And what about Hinsdale Central for the 2nd time this season, knocking off a top 10 team? This one 21-17 over Oak Park River Forest. Matt Rafferty, 2 touchdowns in the last 3 minutes and 20 seconds.
We were talking a little bit earlier about Liam Morrissey being kind of an off-the-radar kid coming into the season. Matt Rafferty was another one. He didn't play football last year. Basketball standout for Hinsdale Central, 6'7" kid. You don't see a quarterback that tall very often, although that conference actually has 2 of them. David Edwards is the other one. But, yeah, I mean, and the thing with Hinsdale Central is they've got a really good running back, too, in Jawan Edmond, who's also a great wrestler. So, I mean, they've got some nice balance with their offense there. As we said, they beat Bolingbrook earlier. They beat Oak Park River Forest here. Their only 2 losses are to the teams that are going to wind up winning those 2 West Suburban conferences, Glenbard West and Addison Trail. So, I mean, Hinsdale Central is definitely a team to keep an eye out for in the postseason.
And when we talk about some of the big performances from Week 8, here's another new name. Up in Gurnee, Warren's running back Darius Crump closing on 1,400 yards for the season. He ran for 228 against Lake Zurich and 2 touchdowns.
Up there in Lake County, I mean, we've talked an awful lot about Titus Booker at Grays Lake North, who's having a breakout season, but Crump is also having a great season. Warren kind of bouncing back after not really being in the conversation too much the past few years, but I mean, they're going to be a team to be reckoned with too. And I guess, Crump again is another kid who wasn't really on our radar at the beginning of the year, but it looks like he is now.
It's always interesting to see those prospects that do hop on the radar, and all it takes is a couple of big performances like we've seen, and he's got 1,400 yards in the year. I've got to imagine that'll make quite a nice highlight tape. And that's how the recruiting process begins for all of these guys that we've mentioned, and it would be very surprising to see them, not get interest after such a fantastic start to the season.
And finally, DeKalb stayed undefeated over Yorkville this past week, and each team got a big performance.
Dre Brown, who's going to Illinois, had over 200 yards for DeKalb, which is 8-0, as you mentioned. And then Michael Kurtz from Yorkville had over 300 yards. So a couple of running backs. Dre Brown is somebody who committed pretty early. We haven't talked about him very much, but he's having another pretty good season pretty quietly.
It's interesting. Jerry Brown reminds me a lot of Justin Jackson, who's now at Northwestern, in the way they play. Kind of, they're incredibly sneaky. Kind of, you don't talk about them that much, but they always make a big difference in the game. They're game changers. He committed early to Illinois. He had offers from Illinois, from Northern Illinois. A lot of people thought he might stay at home and stay at Northern, but instead he decided to go to Illinois. And he's kind of been the centerpiece of that class for the Illini at this point. He's a 4-star. And like you said, he's a kid that he doesn't get a lot of pub, doesn't get talked about a lot, but he's going to be a pretty solid college performer, I think.
And that'll do it for this Week 8 Roundup edition of Inside the Huddle. Check back later in the week for Beth Long weekly MVP segment starring
Willie Bourbon. This week we're headed up to Stevenson. Make sure we feature one of the Patriots.
And also later in the week, our Week 9 preview edition of Inside the Huddle. For Mike Clark and Beth Long, I'm Brian Chimino. We'll see you next time.